This is Beehive Banter, where sometimes there's so much happening, it's like a lolly scramble as to what we're going to talk about. Housing, hospitals, wages, welfare, taxes, tariffs and occasional tosses. Well, this week, no me going bing bong to change the subject because I've got a bell. So when Brent Edwards goes on too much, just like that. You want to try? Just say something?
Why?
See? Right, there we go. Well, another draft report is out. The Commerce Commission draft report into the building supplies market. Now, a couple of months ago, I predicted it would talk about virtual monopolies and supply chain issues. And what do you know? It says competition is not working as well as it could. With the recommendation, competition is an objective to be promoted. Who'd have thunk, Brent?
Yeah, there was, I think, general disappointment with the Commission's report that it perhaps doesn't go far enough to really spell out, changes to make the market more competitive. But as you say, it does. It tells us what we already knew. Everyone knew the market's not that competitive. And
I'm not according to the government. Their press release was almost like a surprise.
And that people are paying too much for building supplies. We've known that. So what will be interesting is what does happen from now. Now, the Commerce Minister, David Clark, is being fairly cautious at the moment. It's the draft report.
When isn't he?
The draft report, final report will come out at the end of the year. But basically, though, he has sent a shot across the bows of the industry saying they should act now, or suggesting they should act now before the government does.
Oh, before the government does what? The government has done nothing. I tell you what, when the bigger companies breathe a sigh of relief, there's something to worry about.
Fletchers?
I'm not saying anyone. I'm just said the bigger companies.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting. I know you're not particularly impressed by what's happening in the supermarket sector, but we are seeing movement in the supermarket sector now, and there is pressure on the companies there to do something, and they are moving and they're getting pressure. You may get the same thing happening here, but the question is how quickly does it happen? And from, the government's political perspective, with an election only, just about a year or just over a year away, will consumers see any movement in both supermarket prices and the price for what they pay for
I'm going to get onto that soon.
materials?
I'm going to get onto that soon. But here's the thing: David Clark and Megan Woods. He's the guy that says we're going to bring grocery prices down, but not yet. And you say they are, but I haven't noticed it. Drum roll: the government, and this is quoting them, the government is determined to get a better deal for consumers. More talk, more no walk.
Well, I think there is walk in the supermarket sector. The problem is
the government's determined that we're not going to die from climate change. The government's determined that a big asteroid's not going to hit the planet Earth.
Has it? I haven't heard that one.
Might as well.
Ring the bell.
Right, speaking of short on detail, the 150-odd page climate adaptation plan. We need to look at rising seas, apparently. We need to work with insurance companies. Maybe not build or move out of certain areas. Here's all I care about, Brent. How much is it going to cost? How much is my insurance going to go up? And who's paying for the rest?
Well, if I remember rightly, you're up on the hill a bit. You're not threatened by rising sea levels.
You'll be underwater.
You're not being flooded, but probably earthquake.
No, but the insurance, I'll tell you now, but the insurance rates, how long before people can't even afford insurance for their homes?
Well, yeah, and the question will be, too, in some areas, will they be able to get insurance? Because if the insurance industry...
Well, they won't.
They won't because, the insurance industry will say, well, look, that's a flood-prone area. We know that, you know that, therefore we can't
But then what happens to the people who thought, oh, I know, we've got enough money to go and live by the beach, so we'll buy a beach house, and now they're the same people going, well, hang on, my house is going to be flooded and it's going to cost $500,000 to lift it up, and I can't get insurance and I can't sell it.
Well, one of the interesting things from the plan that will come from this is that there'll be very clear information made available now
on the limbs
about the risks.
Yes, which means it's even harder to sell your house.
Because, up the coast from here, up the Kapiti coast...
You'll never sell your house.
The council tried to actually put that through an homeowner's objective because they saw
That's
was
right.
going to put their house prices down. But
it will.
now... Yeah, but if you're on land that could well be inundated by seawater, and we know there are communities around, say, Wellington, and the minister, James Shaw, he launched this at Ofero Bay, which has been impacted by heavy storm seas coming across the road into houses. So those properties are going to have to look at, if they can't be protected, they're going to have to move.
Hang on. It's like people who move near an airport and then complain about the noise.
Oh, so people who move near the sea and then complain about rising sea levels.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean,
because they'd be wanting compensation.
well, that is going to be the big thing. Who's going to pay for the cost of retreating, or the cost of putting up flood protection works, or sea walls, or what have you?
I heard someone interviewed last week it was, who said that won't work because you can only do so much before the sea comes in and wipes it out anyway.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I mean, I can think of a piece of property around Flimerton when you look, and I was down there the other day, seas crashing up against the sea wall, and you think the waves were actually going over the wall into the properties.
Yes, I go back to my original question. Yeah. Who's paying?
Who pays? Well, it's going to be a combination of central government, local government, owners, and insurers.
I'll tell you who's going to pay. Us. That's it. It won't be government, it'll be us.
Well,
because the government will increase taxes, or do something, or there'll be insurance increases, it'll be us.
Well,
and I'll tell you what.
Who's the fairy godmother who's just going to come down and pay for all this? I mean, if you want to keep your property safe, you're going to have to pay for it, aren't you?
I'll tell you why there was no figures in that report, Brent. This is just my theory.
Yeah.
Because the government don't want us to see the costs of how much it's going to cost us all before the next election.
I'll tell you why there are no figures in that. Because they don't know. They don't know how much it will cost.
They don't want us to know because it's scary.
Well, I think they also just don't know.
I'm sorry, time to move on. Speaking of other things we don't like, well, from Fed Farmers, farmer confidence, the lowest level recorded since the biannual surveys began. I'm a bit confused, actually, Brent. Why are farmers so upset, for example, when the Farmgate milk price is the highest what it's ever been, although it is probably going to drop soon, and farm debt is down? I don't get it.
Because of what we were just talking about. All of this uncertainty around who pays, all the uncertainty around the impact of climate change policy on farmers, and of course they've got objections to having emissions priced. I mean, they've come up with an alternative. They don't quite like the alternative, but if they don't take it, they'll go into the emissions trading scheme. Other regulatory issues that they face around fresh water, a whole range of things.
God, I'm depressed.
Yeah, well, I mean, so farmers are feeling under the pump. Even if, say, for dairy farmers, their milk prices are up, but they're feeling under the pump in terms of all these range of pressures on them, which carry with them costs as well. So, I mean, there's a reason for farmers. Throw in inflation, the general economic uncertainty.
Oh, God, I'm going to take some Xanax.
Ring the bell.
Now, the government running out of steam. You talked about that last week. Between now and the election, how can they get things back on track? We talked earlier about a lot of talk, not a lot of walk. How can they do it in the what, just over a year that we've got?
Well, they're going to keep things on track in the sense of their reform program, but is that...
They can't even get things on track if you look at the light rails thing.
Yeah, I know, but I'm talking about, the Three Waters reform and those other reforms. But the point is, will it actually win them any support? Because a lot of those large reform programs they're involved in, reforming health, reforming the Three Waters, the tertiary vocational education training, they're contentious, controversial, and they've all got problems. So they might get them into place by the time of the next election, but whether that's then reflected in people saying, oh, well done, you'll get our vote, or more whether it will be, oh no, don't like that, we'll vote something else.
If they rush through legislation, I'll get to that in a moment. Right, the Greens, can they get back on track? Because they're still in limbo. We know no one's running against James Shaw, but what, now we've got to wait 4 weeks to see if...
Well, possibly longer. So now that there's no one running against him, they then have to go out to all of the branches and have a vote as to whether they endorse that or whether people want the nominations reopened. And again, 25%, if 25% vote to reopen the nominations. Look, I can only presume, because I don't know, but I can only presume those people who voted to reopen nominations have made their, sort of decision their point, and that James Shaw has said he's going to go out and listen more and all of that, so that then you'll get him endorsed. I mean, but yeah, I mean, 4 or 5 weeks from now, they might all say, oh, we have to go reopen nominations again. I mean, that would be a pretty amazing scenario. But I mean, you presume, though, that they'll vote for him this time around.
Never presume anything with the Greens, Brent. till later this week. Right, as you mentioned, third reading of, there's the 3 Strikes Repeal Bill, plus more on the Oranga Tamariki System Children's and Young People's Commission Bill, where pretty much everyone is against changes to the Commissioner, except the Minister. We've got truncated 3 Waters submissions. Now, hang on. The most important legislation this term, probably, or certainly up there, the 3 Waters, and the government want to rush this through.
Yeah, they've truncated the terms of hearing submissions, and obviously, I think they had about up to 90,000 submissions on this, written submissions. Some of those would have been pro forma, but a large number of people wanting then to talk to their submissions. Many of them won't get the opportunity. I mean, so it is the sense that the government's not prepared to listen, which is the opposition's criticism that the government is not listening. It might be consulting, but then it just carries on with what it wants to do.
Why even open for submissions? Why? I know you're saying it's the democratic process that you have your say, but if you've already made up your mind that you're going to do it regardless,
it's the
why bother?
democratic process, and I think some people have pointed to it's more the government acting a bit like a first past the post government because it's got a majority in its own right. It doesn't have to worry that much about any opposition. It's got the votes to get it through no matter what.
Oh, so basically, look, we've got the votes, so it doesn't really matter what you think.
But
is that right?
That's essentially right. But the problem with it, of course, is that, National has said it will repeal it. So we're going to get this topsy-turvy change of and these are big changes, you're right. And so then they'll get turned back. Speaking to Simon Watts, National's local government spokesperson, sort of saying, well, should these people, because they're already advertising for chief executives for the 4 new water services entities, who would apply? Because you might get appointed, and the day after you're appointed, you're out of the job because there's a change of government.
You might get appointed, and the day after you start work, you might get a big payout and not do any work.
Oh.
So you're looking at it the wrong way.
Oh, okay, we better get off on that. We need to get our applications on.
That has been Panda for another week. And I, for one, can't wait to see what political missteps, misgivings and misspeakings happen in the next 7 days. And that's just referring to Luxon. But hey, at least he's got his caricature in the form of a puppet at the backbencher. Not everyone can say that, Brent.
You.
No, certainly not me. Thanks for watching or listening. We do appreciate it.